I raised my son alone for 32 years, and at his wedding, his new mother-in-law spat in my face in front of 600 guests. I felt it strike my cheek before I understood what she had done. One moment, I was standing near the edge of the reception tent, trying to see Marcus beside his bride. The next, Diane Whitfield was inches from me, smiling as if humiliating an old man had been planned between the flowers and champagne. The string quartet stopped. 600 guests turned toward us, and the tent became so quiet I could hear ice settling inside their glasses. "I warned Caroline you would embarrass us," Diane announced. Her eyes moved over my $80 jacket, worn shoes, and the engine grease permanently buried in my hands. "You couldn't even dress properly for your only son's wedding. Leave before people realize what kind of family Marcus came from. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today." My name is Walter Hastings Boone. I was 68, and after my wife died, I raised Marcus by myself from the age of 6. I worked double shifts at a Savannah shipyard and repaired engines at night so my son would never feel like a burden. That evening, I had asked for nothing except the chance to watch him begin his new life. I did not wipe my face. I looked past Diane toward the orchid arch where Marcus stood in his rented tuxedo. He had seen everything. Our eyes met, and I waited for my son to cross the grass. Diane followed my gaze. "Marcus, handle this." He finally moved. Relief rose inside me until he walked past Diane without saying a word and took my arm. "Dad," he whispered, "please, just go." I stared at him. She spat in my face. "I know, but Caroline is crying and everyone is watching. Then tell them what happened." His grip tightened. "You're making it worse." Those 4 words hurt more than anything Diane had done. Marcus led me toward the service exit while guests stepped aside as though I were the person who had caused the scene. Caroline covered her mouth, but never defended me. At the gate, Marcus handed me a napkin. I looked at the boy I had carried through fevers, defended through school fights, and put through college. "Are you ashamed of me?" "Not now, Dad. There may not be another time after tonight." He glanced toward the tent. "Caroline is my family now. I need you to respect that." My phone vibrated before I could answer. A message from the wedding planner appeared on the screen. "Mr. Boone, your final payment has cleared. Thank you for making this wedding possible." Beneath it was the amount I had secretly paid 3 months earlier, $420,000. Marcus had asked me to hide my contribution because the Whitfields wanted everyone to believe they had paid for the celebration. I had agreed for his sake. Now the son whose wedding I financed was throwing me out to protect the people taking credit for my sacrifice. I showed him the message. Marcus barely looked at it. "This isn't about money." "No," I said. "It's about whether your father deserved one person to stand beside him." His face hardened. "Please don't make me choose. You already did." He released my arm and returned to the lights without looking back. I stood alone beside the service gate, with Diane's spit drying on my cheek and the receipt for $420,000 glowing in my hand. Everyone inside believed they had removed a poor mechanic. None of them knew that one tow truck had become a fleet, that the fleet had become Boone Maritime Logistics, or that I was worth more than the Whitfields claimed to own. I could have exposed them with one sentence, but I stayed silent. Their cruelty showed me something money could not explain. They had not merely wanted me embarrassed, they needed me gone. Before I spent another dollar protecting my son, I intended to discover why. The cold wind from Charleston Harbor cut through my jacket as I walked toward the parking lot. Behind me, the music resumed. Within seconds, laughter and conversation returned, as though an old man had not just been spat on and removed from his son's wedding. I stopped beneath the valet awning and waited. Part of me still believed Marcus would follow. He would realize what he had done, come running through the gate, and say the pressure had confused him. I had forgiven him for smaller mistakes his entire life. I was ready to forgive this one before he even asked. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Rain began striking the pavement, and the guests' luxury cars shone beneath the reception lights. Finally, the service gate opened. Marcus stepped outside. My heart lifted until I saw his expression. He was not coming to apologize. "Dad, Did you tell anyone you paid for the wedding? He asked. I stared at him. That is why you came after me? Just answer the question. No, I kept my promise. His shoulders relaxed. That small movement told me where his concern truly belonged. Good. Caroline's parents invited important people tonight. If they find out you secretly funded everything, it'll look like Gerald lied to them. Gerald did lie to them. It isn't that simple. Your mother-in-law spat in my face, Marcus. What part of that is complicated? He looked back toward the tent. Diane lost control. Caroline says she's under enormous pressure. And what am I under? You always do this. Do what? Turn every disagreement into proof that nobody appreciates your sacrifices. The accusation stunned me. I had spent 32 years hiding most of those sacrifices from him. When his mother died, I told Marcus we were eating canned soup because I liked it, not because I could not afford meat. When I sold my wedding ring to cover his school fees, I claimed I had lost it at work. I never wanted gratitude. I wanted him to grow without carrying the weight I carried for him. Who told you I use money to control people? I asked. Marcus's silence answered before he did. Caroline thinks your help always comes with expectations. I expected you not to stand quietly while her mother assaulted me. There, that's exactly what I mean. His voice rose. You paid for the wedding, so now you think I have to choose you over my wife. This has nothing to do with the money. Then stop mentioning it. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Please don't come to the family brunch tomorrow. Give everyone time to calm down. Was that Caroline's request? It's mine. Look me in the eye and say you believe I deserved what happened. He tried, but his gaze slipped away. I believe you could have handled it better. I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. By doing what? Apologizing for the way I look? By leaving when Diane asked instead of making a scene. I touched the cheek her spit had struck. I didn't make the scene, son. I was simply the person no one cared enough to defend. Marcus's face tightened, but he offered no answer. From inside the tent, someone called his name. He immediately turned toward the sound. I have to go. Of course you do. He walked back through the service gate without touching me or looking behind him. I watched it close and understood that the Whitfields had accomplished more than humiliating me. They had taught my son to repeat their version of me. Poor, resentful, embarrassing, and dangerous whenever I asked a direct question. As the valet went searching for my old Silverado, Gerald Whitfield emerged from the rain with an apology already prepared. The calm smile on his face told me Marcus's rejection had not been an accident. It had been part of something Gerald expected to happen. I stood beneath the valet awning and watched the service gate close behind my son. Rain drifted sideways from the harbor, darkening the shoulders of my cheap jacket. The young valet looked at the claim ticket and apologized because my truck had been parked in an overflow lot behind the catering vehicles. Take your time, I said. I had spent most of my life waiting for people to discover that appearances had misled them. Diane saw an old mechanic because that was what I allowed her to see. I still drove the 2003 Silverado I had purchased used. I wore inexpensive clothes and cut my own grass. Nothing in my appearance suggested that Boone Maritime Logistics moved freight through 14 ports across 3 continents. It had not begun as an empire. After my wife died, I bought a damaged tow truck from a shipyard auction and repaired it behind our rental apartment. I worked at the yard during the day and answered roadside calls at night. Marcus often slept beneath a blanket in the truck while I pulled stranded cars from highways. 1 truck became 3. 3 became a regional towing company, and the towing contracts led to freight hauling. By the time Marcus graduated from college, I employed more than 2,000 people. I never told him the full value of the company. I wanted him to become a man before he became an heir. 3 months before the wedding, Marcus came to my office carrying an estimate from the event planner. He looked embarrassed as he placed it on my desk. Caroline's parents are having temporary cash flow problems, he said. They can pay later, but deposits are due now. The total was $420,000. I asked why a wedding needed to cost more than the first 12 houses I had lived in combined. Marcus smiled nervously. This is how the Whitfields do things. Then the Whitfields should pay for it. His expression fell. Dad, please. Caroline has dreamed about this since she was a child. I could refuse a bad business deal without losing sleep. I had never learned to refuse my son when his happiness was involved. If I pay, my name goes on the invoices. Marcus shook his head. That would humiliate Gerald. Everyone believes her parents are hosting. Can we keep your contribution between us? I should have asked why protecting Gerald's pride mattered more than acknowledging mine. Instead, I wired the money directly to the planner and signed a confidentiality agreement. Every orchid Diane stood beside while insulting me had been purchased with my money. Every guest who laughed inside that tent was eating food I had provided. Even the napkin Marcus handed me had appeared on an invoice I had approved. The irony should have made me angry. What I felt was something quieter. I had hidden my wealth to protect my son from entitlement. Marcus had used that secrecy to protect people who treated me as worthless. My phone still displayed the payment confirmation. One call to the event planner could expose everything. I could return to the tent, take the microphone, and tell 600 guests who had actually funded their perfect evening. But public humiliation would answer only one question: who had more money? It would not explain why the Whitfields needed Marcus to believe I was an enemy. I locked my phone and decided to remain the poor mechanic a little longer. People reveal far more when they believe the person in front of them has no power. Headlights appeared beyond the rain as the valet finally located my truck. Before it reached the awning, Gerald Whitfield stepped out from beneath a black umbrella and walked toward me. His face carried the careful concern of a man arriving with sympathy, but he was moving too quickly for someone who had merely come to apologize. "Walter," he called, extending his hand. "What happened tonight was unforgivable." I looked at the hand without taking it. Gerald's smile never moved. In that moment, I understood that Diane's cruelty had been emotional, but her husband's approach was strategic. He had not come to comfort me. He had come to make sure I left Charleston believing exactly what the Whitfields needed me to believe. Gerald stopped beneath the awning and held his umbrella over us. "Walter, I am deeply sorry," he said. "Diane's doctor changed one of her medications. Sometimes it affects her judgment." It was a convenient explanation. Diane became the victim. The assault became a medical accident, and everyone could forget what they had witnessed. "Does her medication also make her seat the groom's father behind a hedge?" I asked. Gerald's smile tightened. "Tonight has been stressful for everyone. The children need peace, and Diane will apologize when she feels better. Marcus already asked me to leave." Relief crossed his face before he could hide it. "Then we understand each other." Gerald lowered his voice. "There is one more problem. The downtown hotel double-booked your room. We moved you to another place near the airport." "You moved me? Your belongings are already there." "Who authorized that?" "Marcus asked me to handle it." I studied him. "Did my son specifically tell you to cancel my room?" Gerald paused. "He asked me to make sure you were comfortable." It was not an answer. He handed me the address of a roadside motel 18 miles outside Charleston. "It's clean and quiet," he said. "Exactly what you need after an emotional evening. I reserved a suite downtown." His friendly expression disappeared. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Walter. Let the children enjoy their wedding night." My Silverado arrived, and Gerald watched me drive away, certain I was heading toward the motel. Instead, I went directly to the downtown hotel. The clerk recognized my name and immediately looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Boone, I'm sorry about the cancellation. Was my room double booked?" She checked the computer. "No, sir. Your suite was canceled at 8:17 this evening. That was nearly an hour before Diane spat on me." "Who canceled it?" "The request came from Gerald Whitfield's office. They reported a family emergency requiring your relocation." "Did anyone speak to me?" "No." "And my luggage?" "A courier collected it at Mr. Whitfield's request." The cancellation had happened before the confrontation, before Marcus removed me, and before Gerald pretended to solve an unexpected problem. They had planned to get me out of downtown regardless of what happened at the wedding. I asked the clerk to print the cancellation record and courier authorization. "Would you like us to restore your suite?" she asked. "Not yet." If Gerald checked, I wanted him to believe I had obeyed. I drove to the motel he selected. The room smelled of cigarette smoke covered by bleach, and red light from the neon sign flashed across the ceiling. My bags waited beside the bed. I locked the door and placed the hotel documents on the table. Then I reviewed the last 6 months of Marcus's life. His calls had become shorter. Caroline convinced him to leave his architecture job because Gerald promised him a better position after the wedding. They moved into a guest house on Whitfield property, and every opinion Marcus expressed gradually began sounding like Gerald's. Then I remembered the thick folder Caroline placed in front of him 3 weeks earlier. She called it routine paperwork, and told Marcus where to sign without letting him read it. I had noticed the letterhead but said nothing at the time. Now I recognized the name. Ashford Private Wealth, the firm managing the trust I had created for Marcus. Sitting in the motel room where the Whitfields had deliberately hidden me, I understood that humiliating me had never been their main objective. They needed me far away before I could discover what my son had signed. 3 weeks before the wedding, I visited Marcus at the guest house on the Whitfield estate. We were drinking coffee on the porch when Caroline came outside, carrying a thick manila envelope. "My father's lawyer needs these signed before the wedding," she said. "It's only a beneficiary update now that our finances are being combined." Marcus reached for a pen without reading the first page. "Shouldn't you review it?" I asked. Caroline smiled. "I already did. Legal language makes him anxious." She placed one hand on his shoulder and turned each page to the signature line. Marcus signed wherever she pointed. At the time, I told myself it was ordinary wedding paperwork, but I had noticed the letterhead. Ashford Private Wealth. It was the firm managing the trust I created for Marcus 15 years earlier. The trust held $8 million and would become fully accessible when he turned 30 or married, whichever happened first. His wedding had activated it that morning. Marcus knew the trust existed, but he believed it represented most of my wealth. I never corrected him. $8 million was enough to give him security without teaching him that his father's fortune could rescue him from every bad decision. Caroline knew about the trust because Marcus had told her. Gerald must have known as well. I sat on the motel bed and reconstructed the sequence. Caroline moved Marcus onto her family's property. Gerald promised him a new job, but never produced one. Marcus became financially dependent on the Whitfields. Then, just before the trust became available, Caroline placed legal documents in front of him and prevented him from reading them. Finally, Gerald arranged to move me 18 miles away on the night the money became accessible. Those were not separate family decisions. They were steps. I called Priya Chandrasekharan at 3:07 in the morning. She had managed my legal and financial affairs for 11 years and answered on the second ring. "Talk to me, Walter." I told her about the wedding, the canceled hotel room, and the Ashford documents. "Did Marcus keep a copy?" she asked. "Not that I saw." "Did he understand what he signed?" Caroline called it a beneficiary update. Priya became silent. A beneficiary change would not normally require that many pages. That's what I was afraid of. "Do you want me to contact Ashford?" "Not yet. If the Whitfields are moving money, I don't want them warned." I asked her to check whether any recent authorization, transfer request, or change of control had been filed against Marcus's trust. Then I gave her the names of Gerald, Diane, Caroline, and every Whitfield company I remembered. "I want a complete financial picture," I said. "Mortgages, lawsuits, liens, loans, shell companies, and recent asset transfers." Quietly? So quietly they continue believing I'm asleep in this motel. Priya asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. "Do you believe Caroline married him for the trust?" I looked at the luggage Gerald had moved without my permission. "I believe someone needed me away from Marcus before morning." Priya promised to begin immediately. After we ended the call, I opened the photographs on my phone from that afternoon at the guest house. In one image, the manila envelope rested on the table behind Marcus. I enlarged it until the printing became visible. Beneath Ashford Private Wealth was a line I had not noticed before. Irrevocable authorization and estate control agreement. A beneficiary update could be reversed. An irrevocable authorization could not. I saved the photograph and sent it to Priya. Her reply arrived less than a minute later. "Do not wait for my investigation. Be at Ashford when it opens." I looked at the clock. 4 hours remained until the office doors unlocked. For the first time that night, I stopped thinking about Diane's spit or Marcus's rejection. If my suspicion was correct, the humiliation had only been a distraction. While 600 guests watched me being thrown out, someone had been preparing to take $8 million from my son. At sunrise, I changed into the canvas coveralls I had worn during my shipyard years. The knees were stained, and one sleeve still carried a burn mark from the winter Marcus turned 9. If the Whitfields had described me as a poor mechanic, I wanted Ashford Private Wealth to see exactly the man they expected. The firm occupied a glass tower overlooking Charleston Harbor. When I entered the lobby, the receptionist glanced at my clothes. "Maintenance uses the service entrance," she said. "I'm not here to repair the building. I need the manager of the Marcus Boone Trust. Senior advisors require appointments." I placed my identification and private client card on her desk. The card was reserved for customers whose managed assets exceeded a level most people never imagined. Her posture changed immediately. 4 minutes later, senior partner Elliot Crane hurried into the lobby. "Mr. Boone, I had no idea you were coming." That was intentional. Inside his office, I showed him the photograph of the envelope Caroline had placed before Marcus. "My son signed these documents 3 weeks ago. Tell me what they authorized." Elliot opened the file. As he read, the color slowly disappeared from his face. "This was submitted as a joint estate planning agreement." "What is it really?" "An irrevocable power of attorney. It gives an outside company authority to direct the trust's investments and distributions." "Which company?" He turned the monitor toward me. Whitfield Strategic Holdings appeared beneath Marcus's signature. Gerald controlled it. Marcus believed he was updating his beneficiary information, I said. "The documents state that he received independent legal advice." "He didn't." Caroline gave him a pen and pointed to the signature lines. Elliot scrolled through the account history, then stopped. "Mr. Boone, there is a pending distribution." "How much?" "The full balance." $8 million was scheduled to leave the trust at 10 that morning. The receiving account belonged to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. I checked my watch. It was 9:41. "Freeze the transfer." Elliot hesitated. "The authorization appears valid. Gerald's company could hold us liable for interfering. You now have noticed that the documents may have been obtained through fraud. Our compliance department needs time. You have 19 minutes. I leaned across his desk. "I established that trust and brought this firm more business than Gerald Whitfield will see in his lifetime. If the money leaves after this warning, every regulator and client connected to me will know Ashford ignored suspected fraud." Elliot reached for the phone. He ordered an emergency suspension while compliance reviewed the authorization. The transfer remained marked as processing. 10 minutes passed, then 15. At 9:56, the status changed to frozen. 4 minutes before the deadline, the $8 million stopped moving. I finally exhaled. Preserve every email, access log, instruction, and document connected to this transfer. We will. No one alerts Gerald until my attorney contacts your compliance department. Elliot printed certified copies of the power of attorney and transfer request. As he handed them to me, his hands were still unsteady. "Mr. Boone, if your son was deceived, this may involve more than a civil dispute." "I know." Outside the tower, I sent every page to Priya. The documents confirmed that Caroline had lied about what Marcus was signing. Gerald's company had taken control, and someone intended to move his inheritance beyond the country before the wedding celebrations ended. I had saved the money, but I had not yet saved my son. Gerald still controlled the story, Marcus believed. To break that control, I needed to discover why a family that presented itself as Charleston royalty was desperate enough to steal $8 million before 10 o'clock in the morning. Priya called before I reached my truck. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "Whitfield Development has been insolvent for 3 years. I stopped beside the curb. Gerald owns half the waterfront. On paper, nearly every property is mortgaged beyond its current value. Several loans are already in default. She sent me a preliminary report. The Whitfield's mansion, office tower, marina, and vacation properties all carried overlapping debt. Gerald had borrowed money from one company to make payments to another, creating the appearance of a successful empire, while the structure underneath continued collapsing. "How much does he owe?" I asked. $18 million to a private lending group in Miami. A legitimate lender? Not one that sends polite reminders or files every transaction with the state. Priya had found recent notices showing that the group demanded repayment before the end of the month. Gerald had less than 2 weeks. The $8 million from Marcus's trust would not eliminate the debt, but it would buy him time and convince other creditors that the Whitfields still had access to cash. "The wedding wasn't a celebration," I said. "It was proof of life," Priya agreed. 600 wealthy guests, imported flowers, photographers, and a waterfront estate glowing with lights created the illusion that Gerald remained untouchable. If he canceled the event or reduced its scale, rumors would spread. Creditors might demand payment, partners might withdraw, and the entire business could collapse. My $420,000 had unknowingly financed the performance, protecting his reputation. I reviewed the documents from Ashford again. The receiving company in the Cayman Islands had been created only 5 weeks earlier. Its registered representative was connected to Whitfield Strategic Holdings. Gerald had never intended to place the money into a joint account for Marcus and Caroline. He intended to move it where my son could not recover it. "How involved is Caroline?" I asked. "We can prove she delivered the documents and falsely described them. We cannot yet prove she understood the offshore transfer." I remembered how confidently she turned every page for Marcus. She had not behaved like a bride helping with routine paperwork. She had behaved like someone following instructions. "Keep separating what we know from what we suspect," I said. "I don't want assumptions. I want records," Priya continued. Marcus's promised position at Whitfield Development did not exist. No employment agreement had been prepared, and the company had stopped paying several senior employees. Moving him into the guest house and convincing him to resign from his architecture firm had served another purpose. It removed his independent income, placed him on Whitfield property, and made Gerald the gatekeeper to his future. The shorter phone calls and sudden hostility toward me were not random changes. Marcus had been isolated slowly, one reasonable decision at a time. Gerald didn't see him as a son-in-law, I said. He saw him as an asset, an $8 million solution wearing a wedding tuxedo. The thought made me feel sick. I asked Priya whether the Miami lender would sell Gerald's debt. Possibly, if they believe repayment is uncertain. Find out who has authority to negotiate. What are you planning? I'm not sure yet. But if Gerald built his life with borrowed money, whoever owns the debt controls the foundation beneath him. Priya warned me not to move until we had verified every figure. I agreed. Anger had made Gerald careless. I would not allow it to do the same to me. My phone buzzed as I climbed into the Silverado. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. For one hopeful second, I thought he had read the documents and understood what I had prevented. Then I answered, and heard fury in his voice. "What did you do to our money?" he demanded. Gerald had already reached him. Before I could show my son the truth, the Whitfields had given him another lie, and Marcus sounded ready to defend it. "What did you do to our money?" Marcus demanded. "I stopped $8 million from being transferred to the Cayman Islands. Gerald said it was a joint investment account for Caroline and me. Then ask him why the account belongs to his company." Marcus released a bitter laugh. "He warned me you would say that." Gerald had prepared an answer for every fact before Marcus heard any of them. "Did you read the documents Caroline gave you?" I asked. She explained them. "That is not what I asked." Silence followed. "They were estate planning forms," he finally said. "They gave Gerald's company irrevocable control of your trust, because he understands investments better than I do. Marcus, the entire balance was scheduled to leave the country this morning. For a property deal." "There is no property deal." His voice rose. "You don't know that. You never even gave them a chance." I looked at the certified transfer request beside me. "I gave them 8 million chances. They tried to move every one of them offshore. This is exactly why I kept the wedding arrangements from you. You think money gives you the right to control everyone." The accusation landed harder because it came from my son. "I protected that money for 15 years so you would have choices." "No, You protected it so I would always need your permission. I closed my eyes. I could hear Gerald's language coming through Marcus's voice. Your wife lied about what you signed. Don't call Caroline a liar. Her father is $18 million in debt. Marcus stopped breathing for a moment, then dismissed it. Gerald says every major developer carries debt. Not debt owed to an unregistered private lender demanding immediate repayment. You investigated them after they tried to steal your trust. After Diane embarrassed you, he corrected. That's what this is really about. You're punishing Caroline's family because you can't accept that I chose her. I froze the transfer before I knew the size of their debt. Unfreeze it. No. The word settled between us. Marcus had rarely heard me use it with him. It's my money, he said. Then read what you signed and tell Ashford yourself where you want it sent. I trust my wife. Trust does not require blindness. His voice turned cold. If you don't release the account, I don't know what that means for us. Are you threatening to cut your father out of your life over a transfer you haven't read? I'm asking you to respect my marriage. And I'm asking you to protect yourself. Choose, Dad. Release the money or stay away from us. He ended the call before I could answer. I sat behind the wheel and allowed myself 10 seconds to feel what he had done. My son had chosen a story told by people he had known for 2 years over the man who had raised him for 32. Then I placed the phone beside the Ashford documents. Facts had failed because Gerald controlled which facts Marcus trusted. I could continue arguing and push my son deeper into their family, or I could remove the power Gerald was using against him. I called Priya. Find out who owns the Whitfields' $18 million debt. Why? Because we're going to buy it. All of it? Every mortgage, note, and guarantee. If Gerald wanted to use money as a weapon, I would take the weapon out of his hands. I was done asking him to release my son. I intended to become the only creditor he could no longer avoid. Priya spent the next 2 days negotiating with the Miami lenders. They cared less about Gerald than recovering what they could before his empire collapsed. While those talks continued, we created Meridian Vantage, a legitimate acquisition company whose ownership was protected behind Priya's firm. Through an intermediary, Meridian offered Gerald $22 million for his waterfront holdings, enough to clear his most dangerous debt and leave him believing he had escaped. Gerald replied within 3 hours. Desperate men rarely investigate lifeboats before climbing aboard. He agreed to meet Meridian's representative in a private hotel suite overlooking the harbor. Priya attended in a charcoal suit, carrying verified proof that the company could complete the purchase. I remained in a nearby room listening to the meeting through a recording system Priya had activated as a participant. At first, Gerald behaved like the respected developer Charleston believed him to be. He described the marina, the estate, and unfinished luxury projects as opportunities delayed by market conditions. Priya allowed him to talk until confidence replaced caution. Your public image is impressive, she said. The wedding alone suggested substantial liquidity. Gerald laughed. That was the point. The point? People believe what you show them. 600 guests, see orchids and champagne, and suddenly no one asks whether the buildings are mortgaged. An expensive performance. Not for me. The groom's father paid for it. I tightened my hand around the receiver. Priya sounded amused. And you allowed everyone to credit you? Walter preferred anonymity. Men like him spend their lives apologizing for having money. I heard there was an incident. Gerald poured himself another drink. Diane sent a message that Walter was no longer welcome. By spitting in his face? Crude, but effective. We needed him gone before he started asking about Marcus's paperwork. There it was, proof that my removal had been planned. Priya asked what made Marcus so valuable. Gerald lowered his voice. $8 million in trust. Once that clears, we consolidate it into accounts we control. And Marcus agrees? Marcus agrees with whatever Caroline explains gently enough. Gerald laughed again. The trust is only the first step. My daughter has already spoken to a specialist about his anxiety. Nothing dramatic, just documentation. If the marriage becomes difficult, we'll have grounds to manage his financial affairs directly. My stomach turned cold. They intended to isolate my son, describe his dependence as mental instability, and take permanent control of his life. What about his father? Priya asked. An old mechanic living off diesel fumes. He doesn't have the money or sophistication to challenge us. Priya changed the subject before Gerald became suspicious. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. He stepped onto the balcony, but left the door partly open. I heard a woman's voice through the receiver. Gerald's tone became soft. "Renata, I told you not to call during business hours." He listened, then sighed. "Tell Sophia that Daddy will be home soon." Priya remained still while I wrote down both names. Gerald continued, believing the harbor wind covered his voice. "Once the Meridian money clears, I'm done playing house with Diane. She can keep the name and the mortgages. I'll take my share and come to you." Gerald was not merely trying to save the Whitfield family. He intended to drain Marcus's trust, sell the remaining assets, abandon Diane and Caroline with the debt, then disappear with a second family no one knew existed. I sent Priya one word: enough. She ended the meeting without committing to the purchase, and left with Gerald believing an offer would arrive the next morning. Instead, we completed the debt acquisition. The Miami group transferred every mortgage, guarantee, and secured note tied to Whitfield development in exchange for immediate payment and cooperation with federal investigators reviewing its illegal lending records. By Saturday morning, a company I controlled held all $18 million of Gerald's debt. His mansion, marina, vehicles, and waterfront projects now answered to a creditor he believed was only a poor mechanic. That afternoon, a cream-colored invitation arrived at my home. It announced a post-wedding celebration at the Whitfield estate that evening. My name had apparently remained on a guest list no one remembered to correct. I placed the invitation inside my jacket and called Priya. "Gerald wants Charleston to celebrate his family one more time," I said. "Then let's make sure they hear the speech he gave when he thought no one important was listening." For 3 days, Gerald had controlled every room by deciding which version of the truth people heard. That evening, I intended to bring him a version he could not rewrite. That evening, I parked my Silverado beyond the Whitfield estate's gates and watched luxury cars climb the cobblestone drive. Through the ballroom windows, Gerald stood beneath a chandelier, delivering a speech about family and legacy. Marcus remained beside Caroline, pale and exhausted. I had not come in my coveralls or cheap wedding jacket. I wore the Navy suit reserved for Boone Maritime board meetings. Priya arrived with 2 federal financial crimes investigators carrying warrants connected to Gerald's attempted offshore transfer and fraudulent trust documents. We entered together. The quartet stopped as every face turned toward us. Gerald lowered his champagne glass. "You have some nerve coming into my house." "That depends on who owns the house," I replied. Diane pushed through the guests. "Security already removed you once. Your security will not be removing federal investigators." The agents displayed their credentials, and the confidence drained from her face. Gerald tried to regain control. "This is a private family celebration. Whatever Walter told you is the revenge of a humiliated old man." "Then everyone should hear your version," I said. I connected my phone to the ballroom sound system and pressed play. Gerald's recorded voice filled the room. The wedding was the point. 600 guests, see orchids and champagne, and no one asks whether the buildings are mortgaged. Guests stopped moving. The recording continued. Gerald admitted that I had paid for the wedding and that Diane's public humiliation was intended to drive me away before I questioned Marcus's paperwork. Diane turned toward her husband. "You told me Walter was trying to destroy Caroline's marriage." Gerald reached for the phone, but one investigator blocked him. Then the most damaging portion played. "The trust is only the first step. Caroline is documenting Marcus's anxiety. If things go wrong, we'll have grounds to manage his affairs." Marcus stared at Caroline. "You spoke to a specialist about me?" "Daddy said it was only protection." Her answer confirmed more than a denial could have. Marcus stepped away from her, as though seeing his wife clearly for the first time. Gerald shouted that the recording had been manipulated. I played his balcony conversation next. Renata's name echoed through the ballroom, followed by his promise to leave Diane after the Meridian money cleared and join his secret daughter, Sophia. Diane went white. Caroline lowered herself into a chair. Gerald had planned to sacrifice both families while saving only himself. "Who is Renata?" Diane whispered. Gerald gave no answer. I stepped closer. "Meridian Vantage will not be buying your properties." "Then why are you here?" "Because the company holding all $18 million of your debt belongs to me." Silence spread through the ballroom. "Every mortgage, secured note, and personal guarantee now has one creditor. The mechanic you believed could not challenge you." Gerald lunged toward me, but the agents stopped him. They informed him that he was under arrest in connection with attempted wire fraud, conspiracy, and fraudulent control of a protected trust. As they placed him in handcuffs, guests began moving toward the exits, abandoning drinks and friendships they had displayed minutes earlier. Diane stood alone beneath the chandelier, watching Charleston society disappear from her life. Marcus crossed the ballroom toward me on unsteady legs. "Dad," he said, "I should have believed you. You trusted the people who promised to love you. That does not make you weak." His face broke, and he wrapped his arms around me the way he had as a child. "I told you that you weren't my family. You were frightened and manipulated. That doesn't excuse what I did. No. But it gives us somewhere to begin." 3 months later, Gerald awaited trial, while the Whitfield properties were sold under court supervision. Diane filed for divorce, and Caroline's role in the trust scheme remained under investigation. Marcus annulled the marriage and returned to architecture. I donated my share of the recovered estate proceeds to a legal aid organization helping families fight financial exploitation and predatory guardianship. Marcus moved into a small apartment near the harbor. Most Saturdays, he came to my garage and helped rebuild the engine of the same Silverado that had sat unwanted in the wedding valet lot. One afternoon, his hands black with grease, he asked why I had never told him how wealthy I was. "Money was never what I was protecting," I said. "It was you." I could not erase the moment my son watched Diane spit in my face, or the words he said afterward. Forgiveness did not require pretending they never happened. It meant those moments no longer controlled what we built next. Marcus tightened the final bolt, started the engine, and smiled when the old truck came back to life. For the first time since the wedding, so did something between us.